Sarah walked along the worn wooden porch, gazing out at the horizon where the Texas sun painted the sky in shades of orange. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the rusty key to the ranch, preparing to lock it for the last time. The battered leather suitcase sat on the bench of the navy blue Ford truck, carrying only the essentials to start a new life in Dallas. The warm wind tugged at the loose strands of her brown hair escaping from the floral scarf, bringing with it the familiar scent of dry hay and red earth. At 35, after losing her husband in a work accident, Sarah had made the hardest decision of her life: to leave everything she knew behind. The silence of the property was broken only by the melancholy song of a kiskadee perched on the withered branch of the century-old oak that had sheltered the house for generations. The sound of bare feet on the sandy ground caught her attention. Emily appeared, running through the half-open gate, her tousled blonde hair glowing under the golden light of sunset. The 8-year-old girl wore a light blue cotton dress, already too small for her thin frame, and carried in her hands a cloth doll patched in several places. Her light green eyes, far too large for her childlike face, brimmed with tears she tried to hide. Sarah had noticed the girl watching her for the past few days, always keeping a respectful distance, as if she knew she shouldn't intrude. Emily's father, a rough man who worked in the nearby oil fields, was rarely home, leaving his daughter in the care of an elderly aunt who could barely look after herself. The loneliness radiating from the child was almost tangible. "Please take me with you," Emily said, her voice breaking, her small fingers gripping the painted wooden fence tightly. Sarah felt her heart tighten at the raw vulnerability on the girl's face. Emily continued speaking, her words tumbling out in desperation. "I know how to make scrambled eggs. I can sweep the house, and I can help with anything. I don't eat much, and I can sleep anywhere." Tears finally streamed down her rosy cheeks, leaving shiny trails on her dusty skin. Sarah glanced around, searching for any sign of the girl's family, but found only the stillness typical of that hour. The plea echoed in her ears like a memory from her own lonely childhood, when she too had begged someone to take her far from an arid life. Sarah knelt down to Emily's height, her calloused hands gently resting on the girl's small shoulders. She could feel the fragile bones beneath the skin, and a faded bruise on the child's left arm caught her attention. "Sweetheart, I can't just take you like this. You have family here, people who care for you," Sarah said, fighting the urge to embrace the girl and shield her from the world. Emily lowered her head, nervously fidgeting with the hem of her dress. "Daddy said he's sending me to live with my uncles in Oklahoma next week. They don't even really know me," she murmured. The wind picked up, carrying the distant scent of rain and making both their hair dance in the air. Sarah looked at her truck, then at the empty house, feeling the weight of a decision that could change everything. Dark clouds began to gather on the horizon, blocking the golden light of late afternoon and bringing a heavy, oppressive atmosphere. Sarah rose slowly, her joints protesting after a day of packing and cleaning. She looked one last time at Emily, who remained by the fence, watching every movement with the intensity of someone afraid to blink and miss something important. "Go home before the rain comes," Sarah said softly, resisting the urge to reach out and smooth the girl's messy hair. Emily nodded, but didn't move, her small feet seeming rooted in the dusty ground. The first thunder rolled in the distance, a warning of what was to come. Sarah picked up the truck keys but hesitated before taking the first step toward the vehicle that would take her away forever. The storm arrived with unexpected fury, turning the sky into a threatening grey mass. Thick raindrops began to fall, creating tiny craters in the dry dust of the yard. Sarah ran toward the truck, but stopped abruptly when she saw Emily still standing in the same spot, drenched, clutching the cloth doll to her chest as if it were her last treasure. The rain plastered her blonde hair to her small face, but she didn't move, her eyes fixed on Sarah with a determination that pierced the soul. "Emily, you're going to catch pneumonia out there," Sarah shouted over the roar of the rain. Without thinking twice, she ran to the girl and scooped her up, carrying her into the house she had already considered abandoned. In that moment, feeling the small, trembling body press against her own, Sarah understood that perhaps her destiny was not in Dallas. Inside the house, Sarah wrapped Emily in a blue wool blanket that still smelled faintly of lavender, a memory from when her late mother-in-law cared for the home. The girl shivered, but it didn't seem to be just from the cold of the storm. Her eyes stayed alert, like those of a small animal that had learned to distrust gentle gestures. Sarah lit the wood stove and put water to boil, preparing chamomile tea the way her grandmother used to on difficult nights. The sweet aroma filled the rustic kitchen, mingling with the sound of rain drumming on the tin roof. "You can stay here until the storm passes," Sarah said, noticing how Emily clung to the doll with desperate force. The girl nodded silently, her lips slowly regaining their natural color. Outside, lightning lit the waterlogged yard, and Sarah realized this would not be an ordinary night. Emily accepted the steaming mug of tea with both hands, as if it were a precious gift. Sarah watched discreetly as the girl took small sips, noticing old scars on her tiny fingers and a recent cut on her lower lip that she had tried to hide. "How long have you been living alone with your father?" Sarah asked gently, sitting in the wooden chair across the pine table. Emily hesitated, nervously toying with the mug's handle. "Since Mama left, about 2 years ago. Daddy said she found a man in the big city and didn't want us anymore." The girl's voice was barely a whisper, laden with a sadness no child should know. Sarah felt a pang in her chest, recognizing in little Emily the same loneliness she herself had faced as a child, raised by distant uncles after her parents' deaths. The storm intensified during the night, and Sarah decided it would be too dangerous to take Emily home in such conditions. The girl had fallen asleep on the living room sofa, wrapped in the blue blanket, with the cloth doll nestled in her arms. Sarah covered her with another quilt and watched the child's serene face free from the daytime tension. Through the window, she could see the dirt road turned into an impassable mud path. At dawn, when the first rays of sunlight broke through the scattered clouds, Sarah made a decision that would change both their lives. She could not simply return Emily to a situation that was clearly unsafe. She needed to know more, to understand the girl's real living conditions before continuing her own journey to Dallas. Sarah made a hearty breakfast of scrambled eggs, homemade toast, and strawberry jam she had prepared the previous summer. Emily woke to the aroma, rubbing her eyes and looking around as if trying to remember where she was. "Good morning, sweetheart. Did you sleep well?" Sarah asked, setting the colorful plate on the light wood table. Emily nodded shyly, but her eyes lit up at the generous serving of food. As she ate with ravenous appetite, Sarah noticed her slipping pieces of toast into the pocket of her dress, a habit typical of someone unsure when the next meal might come. "Eat as much as you want. There's plenty," Sarah said softly. Emily stopped chewing and stared at her with a mix of gratitude and distrust, as if she couldn't quite believe someone truly cared about her without expecting anything in return. After breakfast, Sarah decided to walk Emily home to speak with the girl's father. They followed the muddy road, avoiding the larger puddles and fallen branches left by the storm. Emily's house was a simple wooden structure painted white, the paint peeling in several spots, with a neglected garden overrun by weeds. Sarah noticed empty bottles scattered on the porch and a torn curtain swaying in the morning breeze. Emily's father, a tall, thin man with an unshaven beard, appeared at the door wearing only a dirty tank top and ripped jeans. His red, swollen eyes betrayed a night of heavy drinking, and he could barely stand upright. "Where were you all night?" he yelled at Emily, completely ignoring Sarah's presence. The girl hid behind the woman's skirt, trembling visibly. Sarah stepped forward, positioning herself between Emily and the agitated man. "Good morning, Mr. Johnson. Emily spent the night at my house because of the storm. It wasn't safe for her to come home in those conditions." Her voice was firm yet polite, showing she wasn't intimidated. Emily's father glared at her with bloodshot eyes, swaying slightly. "She didn't ask permission to leave. That girl needs to learn to obey," he grumbled, making a sudden movement toward his daughter. Sarah held Emily tighter, feeling her flinch in fear. "Perhaps we can talk about this more calmly. How about we have a coffee together?" she suggested, trying to diffuse the situation. The man eyed her suspiciously, but the aroma of coffee Sarah had brought in a thermos seemed to disarm him for the moment. The time had come for Sarah to learn the truth about Emily's life. Mr. Johnson accepted the coffee with trembling hands, spilling a few drops onto his stained shirt. Sarah discreetly glanced inside the house through the half-open door. Dirty dishes piled in the sink, beer cans scattered across the floor, and a sour smell that betrayed weeks of neglect. Emily clung to her skirt, her small fingers gripping the fabric with desperate force. "She's always been trouble," Johnson muttered, avoiding looking directly at his daughter. "Ever since her mother disappeared, she's been nothing but a headache. Never sits still, always wanting attention." Sarah noticed how Emily shrank further at those words, her shoulders curling in as if she were trying to disappear. The morning breeze carried the song of birds and the scent of wet earth, a cruel contrast to the palpable tension hanging over the conversation. Sarah knew she needed to tread carefully so as not to make the girl's situation worse. "I understand raising a child alone isn't easy," Sarah said diplomatically, trying to establish a connection with the man. Johnson nodded vigorously, as if someone had finally understood his plight. "Exactly, I've got to work in the oil fields, gone 12, sometimes 14 hours a day, and she can't fend for herself, always relying on others." Sarah caught the contradiction in his words. Emily had clearly learned to fend for herself, cooking, cleaning, and taking care of her own needs. "You mentioned she's going to live with her uncles in Oklahoma. Are they aware of the situation?" Sarah asked carefully. Johnson's face closed off immediately. "That's none of your business, ma'am. You don't even know our family." Emily gripped Sarah's skirt even tighter, her small body trembling with anxiety at the mention of Oklahoma. Sarah realized a direct approach wouldn't work with Johnson, so she shifted tactics. "You're right, I don't know your family, but Emily has been a sweet companion to me during these difficult past few days. I lost my husband recently and have been feeling very alone." Johnson's expression softened slightly at the mention of Sarah's widowhood. "Sorry for your loss. I know what it's like to lose someone important." For a moment, Sarah glimpsed the man he might have been before alcohol and bitterness took hold. Emily looked up at Sarah, surprised she was lying. The past few days had been the first time she had ever visited the ranch. "I was wondering if you'd let her stay with me for a few days, while you get things sorted for the move to Oklahoma. It might be good for both of us," Sarah suggested, holding her breath as she waited for his response. Johnson scratched at his unshaven beard, weighing the proposal. Sarah could almost see the gears turning in his alcohol-clouded mind. Less responsibility for him, more time to drink without worrying about his daughter. "I don't know, she can be a lot of trouble," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. Emily looked at Sarah with a spark of hope in her green eyes, as if she couldn't believe someone actually wanted her around. "She's been helping me a lot with housework," Sarah lied again, feeling she was playing a dangerous but necessary game. "And it would give me time to speak with the uncles about the best way to handle the transition." Johnson downed the last of the coffee, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, and looked at Emily as though assessing the worth of an object he was ready to be rid of. The silence stretched for long seconds, broken only by the crow of a distant rooster. "All right then," Johnson said finally, "but only for a few days. And if she causes any trouble, you bring her back right away." Sarah felt Emily relax against her leg, a barely audible sigh escaping her small lips. "Thank you, Mr. Johnson. I'll take good care of her." He nodded, already losing interest in the conversation, his eyes drifting back toward the empty bottles on the porch as if calculating how long he had before needing more. Emily darted inside the house and returned with a brown paper bag containing a few belongings: carefully folded clothes, the patched cloth doll, a worn storybook, and a faded photograph Sarah assumed was of her mother. The speed with which the girl gathered her things suggested she had been prepared for this possibility, perhaps even dreamed of it. They walked back to the ranch in silence, but Sarah could sense a new energy emanating from Emily. For the first time, there was hope. Back at the ranch, Sarah showed Emily the small, cozy bedroom that had once belonged to her stepson before he left for college in Austin. The light blue painted walls held a few wooden shelves where Emily carefully arranged her few possessions. The cloth doll took a place of honor on the bed, and the faded photograph of her mother was placed on the nightstand. "Is this really mine?" Emily asked in a whisper, as if afraid the question might break the spell and make it all disappear. Sarah nodded, watching the girl's eyes shine as she gently touched the floral fabric of the curtains. "For now, yes. It's yours." Emily ran to Sarah and hugged her tightly, burying her face in her blouse. "Thank you," she murmured into the fabric. Sarah felt tears sting her eyes. It had been a long time since she had felt truly needed, useful to someone. Maybe Dallas could wait a little longer. In the days that followed, Sarah watched Emily adjust to her new routine. The girl woke before dawn, as if afraid kindness was only a fleeting dream. She insisted on helping with every chore, sweeping the yard, feeding the few chickens still in the coop, even trying to milk the lone cow Sarah kept. At breakfast, Emily ate slowly, savoring each bite of toast with jam, her eyes constantly checking to make sure Sarah truly didn't mind her presence. In the afternoons, she sat on the porch with her worn storybook, moving her lips as she read softly, as if learning how to dream again. Sarah noticed the girl flinched at the smallest noise, especially the sound of a car approaching down the dusty road. Gradually, though, Emily began to relax, and Sarah caught glimpses of the joyful child she was meant to be. On the third day, while they were preparing lunch together, Emily finally began to talk about her previous life. "Mama used to sing while she cooked," she said softly, peeling carrots with meticulous care. "She'd teach me the words, and we'd sing together." Sarah noticed how the girl's voice grew distant when she spoke of her mother, as if visiting a sacred place in her memory. "Do you remember any of the songs?" Sarah asked gently. Emily nodded and began to hum a soft country tune about wildflowers and sunsets. Her small, sweet voice echoed through the kitchen, bringing life to walls that had known only silence for months. Sarah felt a strange warmth in her chest. It was as if the house itself were waking from a long sleep, warmed once again by the presence of a family, even if an improvised one. That afternoon, while Emily played in the yard with some kittens that had mysteriously appeared near the barn, Sarah received an unexpected visitor. Sheriff Thompson, a middle-aged man with a graying mustache and a crisp uniform, parked his patrol car in front of the house. Sarah's stomach tightened. Had Johnson changed his mind and decided he wanted Emily back? "Afternoon, Sarah," Thompson said, tipping his hat politely. "I hear you've been looking after little Emily Johnson. Just came by to make sure everything's all right." Sarah invited him to sit on the porch, serving iced lemonade while Emily watched from a distance, clearly nervous about the presence of authority. "Everything's been just fine, Sheriff. Emily's a wonderful girl," Sarah said carefully. Thompson nodded, but his experienced eyes were assessing the situation with professional caution. "Sarah, I need to be honest with you," Sheriff Thompson said, lowering his voice so Emily wouldn't hear. "For years we've gotten anonymous calls about the girl's situation, but we've never had solid proof of neglect. Johnson always straightens up when I show up, and Emily's never wanted to talk." He paused, taking a sip of lemonade before continuing. "But these past few weeks, things have gotten worse. Neighbors report more frequent fights, Emily showing up in odd places looking for food, and Johnson drinking heavier than ever." Sarah felt a chill in her stomach at the thought of what the girl had endured. "What can I do to help?" she asked. Thompson looked at her seriously. "Keep doing what you're doing. Give her stability, safety. If anything more serious happens, or you notice signs of abuse, call me immediately. And Sarah, maybe it's time you considered making this official." Sheriff Thompson explained the process for temporary custody, the paperwork that would need to be filed, and the legal requirements to protect Emily permanently. Sarah listened to every word with growing attention, realizing that her impulsive decision to help the girl was turning into something much bigger. "It's a serious commitment, Sarah. It's not just giving a temporary home, it's taking responsibility for a life," Thompson said gravely. Emily appeared on the porch at that moment, carrying an orange kitten in her arms, her eyes darting between Sarah and the sheriff with obvious concern. "Is everything okay?" she asked in a small voice. Sarah reached out her hand and Emily came to sit beside her, the kitten purring happily in her lap. "Everything's fine, sweetheart. Sheriff Thompson just wanted to make sure you're happy here." Emily nodded eagerly, hugging the kitten tighter. "I'm very happy," she said, looking at Sarah with pure adoration in her green eyes. After the sheriff left, Sarah and Emily sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Emily had become more talkative in the past few days, sharing memories of her mother and asking questions about Sarah's life. "Are you really going to let me stay?" Emily asked suddenly, her voice heavy with a vulnerability that broke Sarah's heart. Forever? The question hung in the evening air, heavy with hope and fear. Sarah looked at the girl, her golden hair tousled by the wind, her cheeks pink from the late afternoon sun, eyes that had seen too much pain but still shone with courage. Emily, I was planning to leave here, to start a new life in the big city. But you came along and changed everything. Emily lowered her head, afraid it was a goodbye. Sarah gently lifted the girl's chin. Changed it for the better. If you want, we can build a new life here, together.